She had a tie bow ties.
So initially it was a joke with my wife. Excuse me, a joke with my wife. We said, "Hey, let's buy 3 or 4 of these silk ties and see if you can learn how to tie them." But for a while, she would do it for me every morning. So it was like our bonding moment because I couldn't do it. So,
Yeah, my wife would choke me after a while because I would be like, "All right, this is not working." But hey, as we're jumping in, there is a Google or a slide doc on your chat. Feel free to open it and use it if you can. You're more than willing to, or you're more than welcome to use it. And if you open it up on slides, I believe 2, 3, and 4, there is an opportunity for you to meet who is in the room. So feel free to enter your name. And prefer nouns, where you're joining us from, and what intentions do you have for yourself today. We're going to spend here the next probably 2, 3 minutes just checking in and waiting for some other folks to join in. Jeff, good to see you. Danielle, I saw you too. Mary, Burley, Amiga, Greta, Tina, hey, great to see you. And Jonathan is going to be helping me out here sharing that Google Doc, and there you beat me to it. Again, you don't have to use it if you don't want, if you don't have access to it. We invite you to use this slide doc. And again, pages 2, 3, and 4, that's an opportunity for you to enter your information. And we're excited to be here. Again, we'll spend the next few minutes introducing ourselves, getting to know each other, waiting for others to jump in the call. And we're gonna have an opportunity to connect in small groups and ask a few questions. So thank you for being here. Good morning, all. Thank you for being here. And for those of you who just joined and are joining us, there is a Google Slide document on your chat. Feel free to open it up and use it as a guide for this conversation today. We have our dear friend Gary Clark with a sharp bow tie. If anybody else shows up with a bow tie, I'm taking them to lunch. Just saying. This is the only bow tie I own, and I did have to jump into a tutorial to know how to tie it and do it right. On slides right. On slides 2, 3, and 4, you can enter your name and your information. And if those are full, feel free to jump on slide 3 and 4. With that, I think we'll jump into. I want to thank you for being here. I'm gonna let my colleague and friend Jonathan take it over. The Google Slides is just a guide that we'll go through. Today we'll have an opportunity to have a conversation for you to connect with others and interact. So relax, enjoy, lean in, and Jonathan, I'll pass it to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Carlos. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Jonathan Jank. I serve as co-chairperson for Connecting Young Nebraskans, also known as CYN. We're an affiliated fund of the Nebraska Community Foundation and a statewide network designed to empower young Nebraskans to connect, lead, and shape the future of our communities and state. Our network includes more than 900 individuals across Nebraska that have traditionally gathered at CYN's every other year annual summit. As I shared at our last All Voices at the Table session, the in-person CYN Summit has been officially postponed to fall 2021 with the location still in Ord, Nebraska. We are planning an exciting in October 2020 with the theme of home. Please stay tuned for more updates via our Facebook page and email list. We'll be making an official announcement with event details coming soon. CYN was built to connect people. There's no better time to connect and engage meaningfully than now. Our Fund Advisory Committee feels the pain the nation is feeling and hear the many voices calling for change. Change starts at home. We are committing to helping create an inclusive Nebraska where everyone can live without fear, fully participate in society, and feel at home in their communities. Our facilitator today is Carlos Barcenas. Carlos is a speaker, coach, and facilitator with ichoosepurple Consulting, focusing on intercultural leadership development. He has lived in Nebraska since 1994 and has worked with people from all over the world who now call Nebraska home. Carlos assists immigrants transition to their new home by offering English language classes, citizenships classes, and leadership development opportunities to assist in finding the resources they need to succeed. For the last 2 years, Carlos has worked with communities and coached local leaders across Nebraska in their intercultural development, including facilitating dialogue in organizations and communities about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you, Carlos, for continuing to lead this important all voices at the table conversation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And again, it's just a great opportunity, and I feel very energized. And this morning, as I was getting ready, talking to Jonathan, and also last night, I was speaking with Gary about, hey, how are we going to have this conversation and what are we going to do? And there's a lot going on. So at our last All Voices at the Table, we asked the question of what do you need from others? What do you need from yourself to engage in this conversation about race? And I'm just briefly sharing this, and I can share it. We can share it at the CYN page, and we'll share it via email as well later on. But these are some of the things we heard participants say of, what do I need in order to lean into conversations about race, about prejudice, about hard topics? And, you know, as you can see, there is being intentional, there's being understanding myself better, understanding others better. And thank you, CYN, for opening this opportunity. A little bit of background, and most of you are familiar with this. Most of maybe you've been at this conversation before. But this came as a start from the unfortunate death of George Floyd. Connecting Young Nebraskans started virtually and shared, what do we do? And one of the things that was clear was that we wanted to engage and we wanted to respond to what's happening about race in our country, but we also didn't want to just do a lip service or just make a statement and not do anything about it. We know there is a lot that we don't know, and we want to learn, and we want to lean into these conversations. And it's very important for us as leaders to engage in this conversation because we want to make our communities better. So as we have this conversation, feel free to pause. I'm going to invite you to pause your judgment, process what you're hearing, process what you're feeling. You're going to have Gary and I engage in a conversation in really casual, but stepping into being bold of what is it like to be Black in America? What is the Black American history? What is the Black American culture and how it plays a role in our communities? All of you that are on the call are probably no strangers to what we're seeing happen, and you are affected in one way or another. So as we get ready, I'm going to ask you to do a couple things. I just want you to have a piece of paper ready and a pen ready, because I'm going to ask you to write a couple things down. But before we start, if you are on that Google slide doc in page 10, and this was put together through my friends at SparkDex, I'm just going to hold 30 minutes of silence, and I want you to just place yourself, take a deep breath with me. Go ahead, take a deep breath. Let's take about 30 seconds of silence and we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be in, well, here's what I'm going to ask you to do now that you have your pen and pencil and pen and paper ready, and some of you are very familiar with this, but we are going to go into a round of getting to know who is in the room. But before you do that, here's what I need you to do. I'm going to give you 1 minute. to write down. And I am on slide 11. But I'm going to give you the next minute, and here's what I need you to do. I want you to write as many descriptors, as many ways that you describe yourself. So for example, on slide 11, you see that I have written male, straight, father, Mexican, musician, Christian, immigrant, citizen. So for the next minute, write down as many descriptors of yourself. Ready? You have 60 seconds. Go. You have 25 seconds. All right, okay, so here's what we're gonna do next. I'm gonna put you into separate breakout rooms. And on slide 12, we're gonna go do 3 rounds of this. And I just want you to answer the first question per round. We're gonna come back to the main room, and then I'm gonna send you out again to a big or smaller breakout rooms. So what I'll need you to do is, once I send you, I'm only gonna give you about 2 minutes per round. First one, I want you to introduce yourself using 3 to 5 words from your list and share why they are important to you. Then we'll come back and we'll do round 2, and we'll come back and then we'll do round 3. So I know some of you are still in your office. There's still things going on. Feel free to interact as much as you can. So for the next 2 minutes, your task is to introduce yourself using 3 to 5 words from your list and share why they are important to you. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready. All right, so here we go. You have 2 minutes. We'll see you shortly. And here we go. Welcome back. And I think I know what you're going to say. There wasn't enough time, right? All right. Well, I'll do better at it, and I'll even give you a heads up next time. So here we go. We're going to go again into this breakout rooms. We just walk down the hallway, and you're going to have 2 to 3 minutes. And the next question, or the next round 2 on slide number 12, introduce yourself using 2 to 3 words from your list that not many people get to see or know. For example, I'm a musician. Not a lot of people get to see that at home. So I am going to send you out again into the breakout rooms. I will give you 2.5 minutes. Make sure you make time. And here we go. Hello, for those that might be watching this recording, right now we are in breakout rooms and participants are having an opportunity to connect with each other and answer a few questions about identity. The first round we did was a question about what, using 3 or 5 words to describe them to share why they're important to them. We also share 2 to 3 words that describes them that people don't usually get to see. For example, I'm a father, people don't, or a musician, not a lot of people get to see that. And the last round is introducing yourself using 2 to 3 words from your list that you are very proud of. So that's what we're doing right now. And we're gonna jump in after this with Gary Clark and continue this conversation about race and leadership in Nebraska. And here comes everybody. They'll be joining us.
Oops, I accidentally left mine early.
Hey, that's okay.
Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. How are you?
I'm doing all right, my friend. How's life going for you?
Pretty good.
Good. Well, thank you for being here today. Hope you all had a good time and a little bit of time to just talk about identity. So let me ask a couple of people that would like to share what's something that you learned that surprised you. Maybe you know some of the people in the room, but does anybody want to share? What did you learn about identity about others? Anything? Who wants to go first? I'll take 3 people. You can unmute and go.
I would say I noticed that it's deeply personal, and that there is sometimes a difference between your work identity and your kind of personal identity. And not that you don't want to share that, but I think in some sense you can't always lead with your personal identity in your work life. I mean, because you're asked to represent not just yourself. So it's a balancing act.
Thank you.
Similarly, what surprised me was, because the question is, what do most people, or what do people not know about you? You'd think they would know your identity. So, how much we don't know about people based on facade or whatever.
Right. I'll take one more. Janny, welcome. Yeah, one thing is what people get to see, then also how we feel and how much we can express. And all right, one more person. Tina, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a long story, and I'm going to pull a couple people out on this. But Gabriel, I didn't get in a breakout room with you, but I'm good friends with Craig Larson. And so I had to send a picture and was like, hey, is this Matt's son? Whatever. And so he said, is that part of that CYN thing? I think I was invited to that, but I'm too old. And I said, we accept the young at heart. And then I got in a breakout room with Steve Brewster, and he talked about bike racing. And I'm like, this guy is young at heart. I'm like, you could be on here. So just kind of interesting how things connect and how we identify. It was really great.
Awesome. Thank you. No, and that's just one thing that I know it's come across about. Yes, the CYN network is for the 20-ish to 40-ish. However, we realized that it takes all of us in a different generations, and it takes all on these conversations of how do we connect, right? So yes, don't be, or maybe it's just me trying to keep young and having them not kick me out of the network because I'm right there on the 40-ish. But thank you for being here. So, why this activity about identity, and why did I start with that? I would encourage you to continue to explore who you are. We don't take time, or rarely do we take time to figure out what our identities and the role our identities play on our everyday decisions. And, Jonathan, you mentioned about at workplace and at home. But as we talk about race, what came up to me is when we're talking about race and prejudice, I can't leave my skin color at home. So as much as I might not want to bring that in, people might judge me according to my skin color. That's an identity that I carry with me. So here's what we're gonna do next. I'm gonna have Jonathan is gonna help me introduce my bow tie twin, Gary. And then from there, we're gonna jump in just a conversation. A couple things that I wanna let you know. You have the Google Slides deck, and you can add any questions on slide 14 that you feel, hey, you wanna ask this, put them in there. You can also put them in the chat, and Jonathan will make sure that they're copied and pasted on that slide. From then on, Gary, you and I are just going to engage in a conversation and really go from there. So, Jonathan, could you help me introduce Gary?
Yeah, so Gary is an amazing guy, and I'm grateful for our friendship over the years, gotten to get to know him in the economic development world. He's served the state of Nebraska for a decade, Gary, now, ish. And what I love about his story, and if you haven't heard his story, I'm excited for you to get to know him more today. But he's actually written a book about it, Unlikely Viking. If you haven't checked that out, would encourage you to do so. And then also gave a TED Talk about it, and he's recently featured in the Omaha World Herald telling his story. And it's a Nebraska story, which I think is one that is I think a part of his identity. So I'm excited to hear more about that from him today. Appreciate his willingness to share his voice to this important cause and conversation. And so with that, thanks, Gary, for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Gary, I'm gonna let you have, like I have any power, but hey, I'm gonna let you. Want you anything you want to share with the group before we settled into our coffee conversation? So anything you want to share?
Sure, sure. So first and foremost, I want to thank Jonathan and Carrie and Carlos for reaching out, and all of those of you who are part of the CYN. I definitely have been a part of it in the past, and I really support the effort and the goal and the mission. Nebraska is definitely a place that's been a saving grace for me. And so I definitely appreciate the opportunity whenever I have it to share my story or share the experiences that I've had as an African American in America as well as Nebraska. But realizing that there are different stories to be told out there and that everyone has some unique journey to tell that can benefit and almost create a bridge for other people. And so in having this conversation, I just want to be extremely open about it, extremely willing to hear the questions that come up and the concerns and thoughts, and let's just have a really good conversation.
Thank you, Gary. So, you know, last night as we were talking, so this race conversation can be uncomfortable, and many of us are wondering, how do we talk about race? Especially, how do I start a conversation with a Black man in America, in rural Nebraska, in the backdrop of COVID, in the backdrop of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, electoral election year. And I've been trying to process that. It just seems like right now the conversation gets either polarized, politicized, or spiritualized, and we all have how we feel, right? So as we're leaning into this conversation, it's not a either or conversation, it's a both and. How do we approach race conversations in rural Nebraska where many might be saying, I don't know any Black man or woman in our community or person of color, but I want to engage in this conversation, or maybe I know one. How do I say, hey, Gary, I want to talk to you about Black Lives Matter. Hey, Gary, I want to talk about police brutality. What would you say to those who are wondering, how do we start this conversation?
Yeah, that's a great lead in. And I would say, given the last few months, we've all gone through some changes just in experiencing and seeing things. And I apologize if you hear my old dog walking around on my wood floor, but that is very possible. I would say that I've had some interesting conversations, people who have reached out to me via inbox to say, hey, I don't feel comfortable having this conversation on social media in front of people or in public, but I want to ask you, what's it like to do this? Or what can I do to be a part of this movement that was taking place after George Floyd? For me, I think it's just a start of having some courage to say what you feel and to say that I don't know what the right path is. And in thinking about how we attack and approach everything else in life, we think about going on the other side of fear, right? We think about, all right, I have this goal and I want to achieve it. Am I going to let anything get in the way of that? And I feel like the conversation about race needs to start there, where you have to have good intentions to start that conversation. And for the most part, I will tell you that those conversations are great. I will be honest that some of those conversations go a little bit the other way, but it is the intent and purpose. And so if you start there, I think there's more to build on.
I've been, you know, when this started, I've shared with you, and I share with, if you've been in this group, and I know many of you, I share that I have to this day not watch the George Floyd video. I even haven't had time or able to process a response other than trying to help my family and those close to me process what has happened. But one of the reasons at the beginning that I didn't watch the video was because before that, I could watch a video like that or similar to that on a weekly basis. So I know that this is a conversation that many in rural Nebraska or in our country were saying, wow, this happens. White leaders, white community members started questioning, and there's this range of people that some knew, some of them didn't know what happened, some of them are in denial, but definitely is how do we make sense of it, right? How do we continue to balance people that want to do something and saying, hey, I get it, and I want to do something. I know you're not speaking for every Black man and woman in Nebraska, right? I'm not speaking for all of them either. And when this started, I had to pause myself and say, Carlos, chill for a minute because this is not about you. What I mean with that was, I am someone of color. While I might relate to some of the things that Black America goes through and has happened, I've only been in the United States since 1994. So I got to get to know their history, okay? So what would you say to those that are saying, hey, I didn't know this happened? And what would you say to those that say, I've seen it happen, it makes me uncomfortable and I don't know what to do? And I know I'm giving you a lot.
Right.
Go for it.
So first off, I think the important thing to consider is always history and the perspective. And what I've learned is a lot of people are not aware of history. They're not aware of how we've gotten here as a nation. And I think that is difficult when you don't have the appropriate context to have a conversation. And you may feel uncomfortable because you don't have that context. And so I would say that the first step is really approaching it in a level that is understanding. First of all, how do you put yourself in my shoes? Now, I've been in Nebraska on and off for almost 20 years. If I think about where I started off at as a student and then coming back and realizing that I've had those experiences when I've actually been called the N-word just going to pick up a car, calling an auto place in town and saying, hey, is my car ready? And having someone say, yeah, you N-word, come pick it up. I've had those experiences where my wife and I have been out somewhere and have not been served. And Carlos, I told you this story when we first got married. We were in Georgia, heading to Florida, to move to Florida. And we stopped at a Waffle House. And the waitress that was serving there, she spoke to a gentleman as we walked in as an interracial couple. And the first thing she said out loud was, I just don't like serving these types of people. And my wife grabbed my arm and she turned around and said, we need to leave here. Just experiences that are subtle and small, but they can be massive experiences where people want to destroy you because of who you are, because of what you look like. I think having the capacity as someone who is not marginalized to see that perspective, to walk a mile in my shoes, or as I know, Tina, you are in an interracial marriage. I hope you don't mind me bringing that up, but there are experiences that someone like Tina will have that will be difficult for someone who doesn't have that experience to even gauge how it might feel every day. For example, when Arbery killed running. I'm a runner, for most of you who don't know. I go out and I run about 4 miles a day at Lake Zarensky. On a good day, it might be 7. But at any point, I never knew what it was like for my wife every day that I'd go out to run. I just thought, hey, he's going out to run, he'll be back. No, when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, I had several phone calls from people saying, I thought about you because I know you just go out and run. And I don't know anything about Nebraska, but I am worried that this might happen to you. Or my wife saying, well, I've always thought about this wherever we've lived, that you might not come back. And within a few weeks later, we had the incident at Lake Zarensky where someone decided to spray paint the N-word on a can by there. Now, there's only a small number of us who run out at Lake Zorinsky. It's myself, 5 other guys that I see, I'm just assuming, and then the superintendent of OPS, her and her friends. I see them every morning. And so these experiences, it helps you to realize that this really exists, that there are people out there that just don't get it. And so I think those of you who are brave enough to have that conversation, please try to step outside of yourself and see what it's like for myself, who's African American, but also for people who, like I mentioned, like Tina, who is in a relationship where you can see and have to wrestle with how people look at you. I think it's important that we have some semblance of understanding, of grace, when we're talking to people who have experienced these things.
So you mentioned grace, and you just made it hard for me to jump into the next question that I have for you. But Cora, welcome, and we have a slide deck on the comments. And Cora, I'm also on a biracial marriage, and so is Cora, and we have some of those experiences. So let me be your friends with all, and this is, let's say it's just you and me in the room. I'm ticked. I'm upset. I'm frustrated we've had another shooting of another gentleman, right? Now, for all those that are on the call, here's what I want you to pause for a minute. When George Floyd was murdered, it wasn't a call for ending all police and we hate all police. It was just a call for higher accountability, right? This was not calling out the good officers and the good leaders in their community. It was a call for those that are not doing things right. I get it, criminal, right? And we could jump on that bandwagon and say, but he was a criminal, he did this or that. In the same narrative, we're seeing that right now with the other gentleman that just was shot and kids were in the room, in the car. Can we just stop for a minute and let's face the fact that we have an issue with race relations and police brutality in the nation, and we need to address that. When I was talking about things being politicized, spiritualized, polarized, I've seen people on my social network and my social feed put things such as, well, if this would have been a white man, you wouldn't have heard anything about it. Or, having a response. We had an unfortunate death of a little kid that was shot by a black man, but the circumstances were different. Man was arrested, went to jail, but people are using these things to validate their white identity. So my message that I really want to yell out sometimes is to say, if you as a white community member are having to post something like that, you're missing the point. That we're trying to say we need to talk about race and how it affects us in identity. What thoughts do you have?
Carlos, can I ask a quick question? Because I want to know what it's like to have that opinion from folks. What is it like for you to see, because I posted what happened to Jacob yesterday. I posted the video and I warned people that it was, intense. But just think about this. Even if this gentleman had, let's say he had a knife in his hand, right? Let's say he actually had a knife or it was hidden in his pocket or what have you. Do you think it warrants being shot in the back 7 times with your kids in the car? And think about that as someone who has kids, that you're reaching back to your car. You're not a threat. And the police have their protocol for that. For me to see people posting that he deserved it or whatnot, I want to know what it's like for those of you who have had that experience where you've seen someone say that. What does it feel like? Or are we missing something? Are we missing why that response is there in the first place?
I'll chime in. My father-in-law is a former police officer, and I had a very interesting conversation with him. And kind of the gist of it was just what a dangerous job being a police officer is, and that I could never possibly understand. I mean, basically, I can't understand any side of this, I think was kind of what he was trying to say. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like we went in circles. And yeah, I mean, the truth is I can't relate to his experience of being a police officer. That situation's really interesting because he himself is an immigrant from Iran. And Iranians are a very interesting situation because technically they're Caucasian, but othered in so many ways. And so I don't know, there's a lot wrapped up in that, and some very interesting conversations I've had with him about that. But so yeah, and that just goes back to this identity thing and just how that informs in ways we really can't understand just how complicated our feelings are about everything that's going on.
Gary, what confuses me is the noise. So you hop on any social media platform, and Carlos had used the word polarized at the beginning of this, and that's what it feels like. And it seems as though it's hard to understand both sides, because part of me thinks they've got to be kidding, or there's some sort of sarcastic quip about trying to make them wrong because of this other lens with which to view the whole situation. And, you know, trying to be empathetic toward the situation, you don't want to stop the empathy just because someone has a differing viewpoint. And it feels like it gets so muddled, and it's emotionally taxing to try and understand, you know, what does Carrie's father-in-law, what does his situation and his experience have to do, and what weight, and how does that inform my own opinion of this? And it seems like a daunting task, and I think that's what prevents a lot of us from trying to leap and say, yes, but this person said this, and this person said this, and this viewpoint illustrates this. And most times it feels like it's easier to just give up and say, okay, I'm just going to assume this attitude and you know, just do the best I can to understand. And that makes jumping into a conversation really tough because you've seen all of these polarized viewpoints. How do you enter one of those into the fold? It may not be my viewpoint, but if I were to suggest, yeah, he's a criminal, he deserved it. How do I engage in that thought process if that's a legitimate viewpoint of someone that very well could be in my community? How does that discourse happen without fear as someone who isn't Black in my community or in America today?
So thank you, Carrie and Andrew. Whatever, and I just want to pause for a minute. And whatever feelings you're having right now, it's okay. You know, it's a complicated conversation, and I just want to make sure, because I feel like in these conversations where we are right now, I just want to clarify, and for those that might view this later, this is not a conversation about against police, against leadership, this is just a conversation about, this is what my Black friends, this is even something that I can somewhat relate to, have to live every day with. I have great friends that are police officers. I know spouses of police officers. My wife was a nurse at a correctional facility, right? When this happened, I noticed how my friends that had ties to police enforcement, their police identity, their law enforcement identity felt under attack. And they haven't been able to, it's been hard to have this conversation, right? So one of the things that I shared, Gary, is that I am not afraid of police in my community. But here's what I'm afraid of. Right now, when things like this happen, is when I'm more afraid and more cautious of police. I'm not afraid of the police officers who are trying to do the right thing and they're working hard and they know they're trying to do the right thing. I'm afraid the day that I get pulled over and it's a police officer that has had the longest day, has had a hard time dealing with people attacking him because he's not doing the right job. His unconscious bias kicks in. You know, he's feeling under pressure, and now he's pulled over a Mexican, Spanish-speaking immigrant, and he's frustrated, and I'm frustrated. Where does it go from there? You know, so how do we, as leaders, what we say matters. What we post in our social media matters. Who we call in matters. Why am I hesitant and afraid? Because I also see what my friends post, and I also see that if you mention Black Lives Matters, some of the officers and law enforcement feel attacked, and they have their conscious bias kick in, right? So that kind of gives me a little bit in of how they might be feeling and what they're doing. I have to be careful with that. And I here's what I think, and I would like your point of view. I think it's a double-edged sword. Yes, has Black Lives Matters been hijacked and there is an extreme movement with it? Yes. But also, when we're trying to say Black Lives Matter in the context of, hey, we need to talk about race. Whatever you're feeling right now, it's okay. So how do we, you know, I was afraid to disappoint my children when we went to Walmart because they're light skinned. The last thing I wanted was somebody to call the cops because somebody was stealing children. That's what I live with, right? When I go out in public, I have friends that tell me, when you go to this town and to this town in Nebraska, be careful because there are white supremacy groups and I know who they are. I mentioned last night to you, Gary, I had a white gentleman sit in my front porch and tell me that when white lives matter, when white, I'm getting on my soapbox here, when white power, white supremacy started, he was telling me they started doing good things and they had a positive message and they wanted to do things for their community. And it was the same thing as saying brown power and white power. And I'm in my front porch with a white man telling me this, with my kids. My wife grabbed my kids and left because she wasn't sure, okay, where is this going? But those are my experiences that I have to watch out for. And that's why I'm afraid of we're not having these conversations. How do we move forward? How do we say, hey, as a white leader, as a Black leader, we need to put this forward in our communities? Right.
So I think that's a lot to unpack here. But I think first and foremost, for everyone on this call, if you believe in humanity itself, if you believe that maybe race, and I'm going to throw this out there, I'm diving into kind of my Omaha World Herald column here, but maybe race is a fallacy that we've created, right? Maybe the San African folks who have all of our DNA, right, and we can all trace back to it, maybe our conversation needs to shift to what's real about humanity. And maybe we need to step away from this polarizing piece that puts me versus my friend Jonathan because of how we look, our pigment. I think it's difficult for us right now because we have people dying who are unarmed. And all of us have people who have died in some treacherous way that we can't understand. And I think it puts the onus on us to put the petty stuff aside and think about humanity. And for me, I was contacted by 4 film producers when James Scurlock was killed in the protest in Omaha. And they said, hey, do a poem real quick and we'll do a video and we'll put it worldwide. We'll try to push it out. And I thought about, Carlos, your question. As a leader, how do I look once I do this video, once I put this piece together? And it was a question about what's a Black life worth to you? And I had to talk about the history of this country and where we come from. That everything that has established our country came from something that was tied to hate. That the original genesis of who we are was tied to hate. So how do we wrestle with that now? And I really think it's almost like an addiction. right? What do you do with an addiction, right? You have to first admit that you have one, right? You have to first admit that you need to wrestle with it. You might need a little detox too. So if racism has permeated our lives, then we need to detox from it, right? We need to remove ourselves from it a little bit. We need to clean ourselves up. Maybe there's a 12-step program that we need to go through as a nation. These are the things that, go ahead, Carlos. It looks like you want to chime in. Go ahead. Okay. For me, these are the things that we need to deal with. Each of us have children at home that we want to live in a world that has nothing to do with what's happening today. Am I right? I hope. Am I right? So how do we as leaders make it possible? That means that Allison and Steve and Mary and those of you on this call, that your group of friends, your circle of friends, that you're having this conversation. You're having the uncomfortable conversation with people who you are always around so that you can impact how they impact the world. That's as much as we can have to impact our small little circle, our rural places. And get this, Carlos, we talked about this. In places like Seward and West Point and Fremont and Grand Island and all over, we need diversity. It is our lifeline. We need inclusion. So what are we talking about here? This should be an easy thing to nip in the bud, but it's not, because we're holding on to fear and fallacies.
So it sounds like self-awareness. If we were talking skills that we need as leaders, everybody that I see in the school are leaders in their community. It's having self-awareness of who we are. You know, we started with identity. Maybe I'm the only one with a gut feeling right now that is just uncomfortable. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have to process this information. Maybe you're thinking about your family members. Maybe you're thinking about your friends. And that this is a non-closure conversation. It's something that we keep going. But, you know, when I mentioned polarized, politicized, and spiritualized, those are very tied to my identities, for example. How do we continue to say, for those that have a spiritual belief and have a relationship with God, how do we continue to say, hey, we love our brothers the same way we love ourselves, but yet we hate them during the week, but we love them on Sundays? You know, it's like we like them during worship, and we're okay with their skin color and what they're going through. But from Monday to Saturday, we don't. But it's stuff that we need to process. So let me throw this at you in the sense of race, and this is here's my thought. Some of the hard conversations we're seeing, and sometimes we have to jump into politics. This is not a one or the other, but we have to address it, right? Politics drive a lot of this conversation, and it's an either-or conversation. Regardless who you voted for, who you believe voted for. One example that I had is I don't agree with the current president. I don't agree with a lot of his views, but I keep myself and my bias on check, that I can recognize two things. One, when there are things that have moved forward because of who he is and what he's brought into the country. With the death of his brother, I can recognize his humanity as well, and I keep him in prayers, and I can support that. You know, we all have those hard topics that it seems like sometimes I even felt dirty liking something that it was the opposite party, right, on Facebook or whatever. It's like, I have that cringe. But the reality is sometimes we let our feelings polarize the view of others. How do we keep ourselves in check? It's something that we need to do. So what leadership skills can we build on to grow who we are as individuals and who our communities are? And from there, as you think of an answer for that, Gary, let's jump into, if you have any questions, we'll open it up to questions. But so skill set, what do you think, Gary?
So I think this is a great question. And I think it takes humility first and foremost. For me, I always have to think about who I'm talking to, what group I'm talking to, and the fact that not everyone has had my experience. I did a speaking engagement last week in North Platte in 2 different places. And as long as I've been in Nebraska, first and foremost, it started out being apparent to me that I might be the only one in the room early on, right? But as long as I've been in Nebraska, that feeling has gone away slowly and surely, where I'm not thinking about me being the only one in the room, that I'm thinking we are collectively together. And I think that's really the goal. Humanity and humility are leadership qualities that you need. You also need patience, because I had a gentleman once I got back to Fremont that wanted to talk to me about his father and how they had grown up learning that racism was the right lifestyle for them, that he grew up with his dad telling him that the N-word was a good word to use to describe me. And he felt he needed to say that to me on that day. I had to think about his perspective and how I might respond to something that might otherwise drive someone else crazy. And so leadership is not always just speaking up in public and making the nice statements, but sometimes it's learning what your faults are and how to wrestle with those things. And for me, on that day, it was apparent that I needed to take a step back.
Thank you. So and you brought a good point about, I think we've gone full circle at generations here. I think we're having to talk more about race, and it seems like people don't care. But if we trace back a couple generations back, those that were kids, you mentioned, those that were kids back in the 60s and 70s that grew up with a mentality that Black people are inferior. You can call them the N-word, it's okay. And they haven't checked their lived experience. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong right now. I just want you to process this. Now they're the people that are in power positions in the older or powerful organizations. And now it seems like we've gone full circle where people think, well, it's okay to have this conversation, but there's Black communities are not part of the American history. It just seems like it's gone full circle. Do you see some of that? Do you think there is some truth to that? I don't know. It's just a thought.
Definitely truth to it. And, honestly, if we were to bring this conversation full circle, I would say that that's probably the biggest element in this conversation for me, is how do we move from that history to a new day? And part of it is probably a solution that's tied into equity, right? That our rooms and our boardrooms and our leadership is not only African American, but it's women in that leadership, right? That there's some diversity there so that we have that perspective. In Fremont, we created a multicultural inclusion council after varying degrees of issues, and we still had a few issues. And guess what? We had to talk to a few groups and say, hey, next time you think about doing maybe this graduation speech, reach out to us. Let us know, what perspective is there. Or, hey, maybe if you have a theme day at your high school during a game, that you think about what those themes are and you restrict certain themes, right? So some of it is solution-based by showing leadership. We have a school board that has no Latinos or Hispanic representation at all, but our school is actually about 40-50% Hispanic. So there's something wrong there. So we need to shift that, because you need a voice. And so, Carlos, I would say the solution is equity by leadership, by positions, and those folks that are in the 60s and 70s were growing up, who become leaders now. Some of them, no disrespect, they have to step back and let someone else that looks like Andrew, that looks like Tina, or looks like Allison, or even looks like Carlos or myself, to be in the boardroom.
Thank you. So here's what I want to give a chance and opportunity to. So there's a lot that we're still processing, but I would like to just break you up into groups and just send you out for a couple minutes. One of the groups is going to be lucky enough to have Gary, and maybe Gary, you can just be our fly on the wall. But here's what I would like you to do. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, 2 minutes. What has come to mind? What questions are there that you still think we can ask Gary? You can ask me when it comes to race, when it comes to racism, when it comes to prejudice, all that. You know, you talked about relationships. I just want to be, I'm so thankful. Mary Burley, you're in the call. I remember as the first upcoming director of a nonprofit, being not knowing anything of the nonprofit world, stepping into a white majority of nonprofit leaders. Mary, you were one of the few, if not the only, who reached out to me and said, hey, how can I help you? And it was just, it made an impact on me. Greta Leach, she was in our call too, same thing, being able to see me as who I am and the opportunities. Jeff, Carrie, the folks with the Nebraska Community Foundation, you know, when we're talking about representation, you've been able to say, hey, we see you and we want to be part of this journey. So that has made a change and we need to continue to do that. So what I want to do next, well, thank you, first of all. What I want to do next is I'm going to send you out into groups. You will have a couple minutes. You're going to have 3 to 4 people per room. And what I want you to do is just have a conversation of, we've talked about identity, racism, prejudice. What are 2 or 3 questions that you want to ask Gary or myself when it comes to having all the voices represented at the table? So here we go. I'm going to send you to rooms. You have 2 minutes. Come up with 2 to 3 questions. Process everything that you've heard. Here we go. Let me unmute first. For those of you that are watching this recording, thank you for being here and having this uncomfortable, comfortable conversations about race. We have our groups right now talking and sharing and coming up with questions that Gary and I will answer as soon as we come back. One of the things that we encourage you to do is to continue to be intentional, figure out who you are, what your identities are, how you feel about race, and ask the question, why do you feel what you feel? Where does that come from? And also to build relationships with those that don't look like you or sound like you, as well as focusing on learning and developing new skills and practicing empathy. So thank you for being here, and we're going to be coming back from small groups shortly. Welcome back. Welcome back. I believe we have everybody. I hope, I feel like I'm on a TV show because when you guys are in breakout rooms, I get to hit the record button again and say to everybody, hey, and this is what everybody's doing in their rooms. Feels pretty cool. I hope it's recording. So thank you. So Gary, I know you were able to be part of one of those conversations, but if there is, so who wants to start from the group, ask those questions, and either for me or for Gary, and we'll jump on that. And from there, Carrie, we'll get ready to close. And so, questions?
Not all at once now.
Go, Cora.
No, I was just saying, not everybody all at once now. Yeah. I think Greta had some amazing questions in our breakout group. I guess my only question was, you know, we talked, I believe I jumped in late, but I assume he's from Omaha. Is that, I think I picked up on that. And I'm just curious on the differences kind of between Omaha as a bigger town and I'm from Aurora as a smaller town. And, you know, I've seen over the past few months a lot of, it seems like people are processing things differently just based on, you know, the size of community that you're from. And I don't know that there's a question in there that's very properly formulated yet, but it just seems like we're all kind of in different places with people around us feeling different things and trying to all come together. I really appreciated this. So I'll hand it over.
So I'm originally from Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Actually, most of my experience in Nebraska has been mostly rural and up until recently. And so I spent almost 6 years in West Point, Cumming County. And actually, before that, I was in a small town just outside of Gainesville. But of late, obviously, I've been in the Omaha area. And I would say that you're correct, that a lot of it is where you are. I think about COVID right now and the response that is so different from large metropolitan areas that are being hit very hard versus rural places where it's maybe some have been luckier than others. And I would liken that to this conversation only in the respect that there's more, there are more people who are excluded from certain issues based on the density of their population. But race isn't one of those. Actually, it can permeate every piece of our lives. And I kind of like the way that Tina had asked or posed the question or conversation tied to this, Cora, which was briefly just stating that having a welcoming community that does accept diversity and inclusion doesn't absolve you from making sure that it is a continuous movement. And that you are very forward thinking in that process. And I think that is a key nugget to hold on to. And so regardless of where we are, if we are not willing to be forward thinking and not reactionary, so this whole summer has been reactionary, right? Oh man, this has happened again. Oh man. So where are the policies from your local municipalities, your local economic development community, organizations, whoever you are, that makes you forward thinking?
Thank you, and I think it's important to know that when we approach this, it's tough to approach these conversations, but once we approach them, it's not about admitting guilt or that we're wrong. It's admitting it from a place, hey, how can we do it better? How can we step into and prevent it in the future? So what other questions do you have? Ask us anything. You could also type it in the chat box if you want, and I'll read it. But what's something else that you would like to ask a black man and a brown man in bow ties? You don't get this combo too often. And you can ask us anything.
I guess as a follow-up question kind of along those lines is, how do you approach conversations when communication and experiences are so different? You know, people I have talked to on things, you know, I'm from York, small town. People that have grown up in small towns have a completely different view when it comes to like the police issue. Because they place what's happening, you know, with George Floyd, they place the York police, who they might have a relationship with, everybody there, and say, that's different, that would never happen. There must be something that he did that deserved it, quote unquote. Versus people that have only ever lived in cities might not understand the relationship that people have in small communities to their police force. And they, you know, just different experiences. And how do you approach those conversations with people, getting them to think outside their life and their lived experiences?
That's good. I'll give you mine, then or Gary, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say quickly that some of the approaches are just being willing to engage people who you've never engaged before. I think it's really important on that first piece of your question. And sometimes I'm an introvert. After being out in public and doing a speaking thing, I don't want to really be bothered sometimes, and I need to step outside of that, you know. But on the police side of things, Carlos, and I want you to fill in on this, because I do think everything goes back to history and being able to know the context of why Black and brown folks feel the way they do. Obviously, now we're seeing it on video. It's being videotaped, those fears and concerns. And I don't know how many of you have seen the little kid who was playing basketball. It was a video, and a police car drove by, and he hid behind the truck as the police car went by. When it left, he came back out and finished playing. If you haven't seen that, I hope you can find it. It's just, it's a touching feeling. I think I teared up just a little bit because I knew that my kids could be in that perspective, you know. But the history of policing, right? Where do we know police started out as slave catchers? Like this is the history that is tied to African Americans. The first police creation was tied to catching runaway slaves. So think about that as we try to break down where we are today. Go ahead, Carlos.
Well, you had me thinking on.
Sorry, I did put you on the spot there.
Oh, you're good. No, you're good. It's just, here, the reality of race relations, right? And how do we break it apart? And there is not a simple fix. And we need to realize how it plays a role in what we do. In my everyday, I got to be conscious of my skin color. And what I got caught up thinking is, I gave my children a white sounding name and a Mexican name because I didn't want their future to be cut short because of having my last name. So that hits home because we have great police officers, right? We have great people. To your question of how do we have this relationship? How do we have these conversations? Sometimes it's not so much about trying to get to an answer, but to get to people thinking why they see things the way they see it. Why? I live this, and many of you would say, well, Carlos, that wouldn't happen to you. I had something happen. I'm not going to tell you which community. I'm not going to tell you which city. I'm not going to tell you where, because my point is not to highlight their officers or whatever. But I had an instance where I was in an accident. I asked if I could get the report of, okay, who's at fault? And I was told, hey, you'll get the information. And I was T-boned. The other driver was white. And I got blamed with, it was my fault. And my insurance was like, how did this happen? They were trying to look at it. Now here, I'm not trying to do a pity party. I'm not trying to say side with me. But how many times in our communities we have stories of people of color that are saying this is happening. And the reaction is, oh, no, that wouldn't happen here. Because I know the police officer. He wouldn't do that. But we all have our conscious bias. We all have our lived experiences. And if we don't take time to build those relationships, when you're asking, how do we have the conversation? Asking, why do you think that? Why do you think this wouldn't happen here? What if we did? And to Gary's point, sometimes I do get exhausted of trying to answer questions for people, but then I also feel like it is my place to help people understand. So not only, I'm willing to answer any questions, but also do your own research. How does that affect you? And just pause, learning to pause and process the information. Sometimes it's just so much that we want a closure, right? We want an answer. But many times it's asking, what if? I know we have CROs or police officers, resource officers in our schools here in Grand Island. I think we have one of the best programs. I think it's a good thing. However, I've started asking myself, how do we approach Black Lives Matter in education with kids of color in a society that now feels like it's blaming police and is demanding of police, and some people feel like Black people and people of color are not stepping up to the plate? There's a lot that we need to do, and that comes with knowing where our biases are or lived experience. And I'm kind of going off a little bit on what you're asking me, Gary, but I think it is know the history of, if you don't have many people of color in your community, ask the question of, you want your community to be welcome? Who are we not inviting at the table? Are we willing to have this conversation? Are we opening it up? And be okay being uncomfortable. So I hope that helps. Gary, I saw you in mute. Go ahead.
I just read, I think, Greta's comment at the bottom. And I just want to make sure I responded to it. That's a good one. But before I do that, I wanted to make sure that another history piece, some of the reasons why people are so, especially African-American people, are apprehensive about other cultures and how they might perceive them is, again, because people dismiss what history means. And I keep saying this in different categories, but if you think of slavery and how it benefited capitalism and our economy today, there are companies today who benefited from slavery back then and are profitable right now today, that you can look up and find that they benefited back then as well. So for people who say this is old news or whatnot, just look at the connection to history and today. So in saying that, I want to respond to Greta's awesome question. I love being Black. So Greta, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and one of the things I love about being Black is, first and foremost, the power in my family's voices, the way they laugh, the food that we eat, the dances and the music that's in our culture, especially in DC, and the culture there. The way we use our words, which my mother used to beat me if I'd use those words, but the way that we use the slang there. Now, saying Gary, it would be Gurry. What's up, Gurry? Or party is potty. You know, like just different linguistic changes there that I just love. I love the Maryland blue crabs, and that we love spades and things like that are probably cultural stereotypes, but also some of them are really rich in our community, you know? But what I would want you to know is that we have the same hiccups and messed up families as everyone else, you know, and we have the same issues as everyone else. But I just love how I grew up in certain respects. And I want to put a button in this, Carlos, just to say my perspective from what we've just talked about. There's some big issues in race in Nebraska and across the globe. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I benefited from coming to Nebraska, that while I've had some bad experiences and I've had to learn from those things, I've also had these amazing experiences that I would love for people to be aware of, because as young Nebraskans, or more young at heart Nebraskans, I want to make sure that people know that this is a really cool place to live. And so, saying that, I'll close.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's just awesome. Thank you. And I think the context, what I want to bring up, thank you for clarifying that context. You know, these conversations are not, it's non-closure. We need to continue to have them. But many times we get so caught up on, well, let's just celebrate the good things, right? No, we also need to talk about this. And this is the space for it. We're not trying to blame. We're not trying to put who's at fault. We're just trying to say, here's our lived experience. I don't speak for all the Mexicans in the community, all the brown people, the way that Gary does not speak for every Black person, but that's our lived experience. And we need to engage in this conversation. So before we close, two things. In slide 13, Gary, you have a quote that says, "I would like to thank you, Nebraska, because you saved my life. You showed yourself to be open to my Black life. You provided tough experiences and tearful moments, but you also provided a dream, hope, assertiveness, and opportunity." And it's true. Thank you. On slide 23, as we're closing out, feel free to fill any of those sticky notes with what's something you've learned today that you're excited about. We need to continue to have this conversation. We're really appreciative of all of your time, because you're making a space to have those conversations, to engage. And Gary and I are not cultural experts. We're just sharing our life experience, but we're willing to step into that uncomfortable place. So we ask you to continue to open your heart, open your mind. And, you know, sometimes we just need to pause and figure out, why do I feel the way I do? How does this affect me? We could go into more. There's so much more, you know, code switching. I mean, being just a whole cultural. I even change when I'm around my Black friends, the way I carry myself, the way I carry myself when I'm with my Latino friends. You know, we talked about identity, and there's just so much. So relationships are important. Thank you. For all of you that might be seeing this recording at a future time, please make sure that you're connecting with the leaders who are in these communities. Visit the CYN Connecting Young Nebraskans page. There's an opportunity for for all of you to engage and support. Final thought, Gary, anything else? I'm going to give you a final thought. And if there's a burning question or thought that anybody wants to say, then I'll pass it on to you. And if not, then after that, I'll send it to Gary. So Gary, final thought.
First and foremost, I just want to thank CYN for all the work that you do in the state, and your efforts are needed and valid. And I just want to thank you all for having an honest conversation about race with me. And, you know, my goal is that each of you, next time I see you, that you have a silk bow tie on and that you've learned how to tie it. And also, I just want to say that the power is within each of you to impact our lives when we talk about race and ethnicity. Each of you have a circle of friends that you can talk to honestly and change their perspective. So please do that, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else that has a burning last thought question that you want to, before we go?
I do want to say one thing, which is we've talked a lot about history, and I love history. I've studied it, you know, through graduate school and everything, but it wasn't until college that I started realizing, and we talked about this in our small group, but until I started realizing how kind of false the narrative is that we're teaching kids in our schools, because we present things as if something fixed it. Like we already mentioned this earlier, like the end of the Civil War meant that slavery wasn't a problem anymore. So, you know, no one's racist, that doesn't matter. Or the Civil Rights Act ended segregation, so that's not an issue. And then white kids learning in rural places who don't have a lot of exposure to people of differing skin colors don't have that empathy, perhaps, because they just don't understand the experience that people are having now, and they're sort of taught that, like, that's a problem of the past, not a problem of today. So just as, like, leaders in our communities who are advocating for the, you know, better understanding of these things, I think that's something that's helping me, at least, to navigate this kind of, is to understand that revisionist history is a real thing, and we really need to be aware of it and trying to do better.
Thank you, Jen. Exactly. Let's keep looking at history and how it affects us all. There, you can go to file and make a copy of this file and keep it for your records. On page 17 to 21, there's something that I put in, an acronym, CAFE, but it's about contacting your cultural other and just things that you can do, an action plan that you can do. It's still a work in progress, but thank you for the opportunity. Carrie, would you like to close us out?
Yeah, that would be awesome. First, can we give a huge Zoom round of applause, which looks like this, to Gary and Carlos. Thank you both so much. Carlos, this one was so interactive and fantastic. Gary, you definitely, just the way that you lended your voice and kept the conversation going. We appreciate you both so much. Thank you. Okay, I have 3 assignments for everyone. They're easy, I promise. The first is to go read Gary's column, which I just posted there, and share it with people, with your social networks. Share it. And he said that he has another one coming out soon, so watch for that. Number 2, and we've been talking about this a lot, but have a conversation with someone that you don't really want to have a conversation about this with. I mentioned one that I had with my father-in-law, which is, I've been having a lot of conversations about this lately. That was for sure the hardest one I've had to date. So, but it was, I don't know. I feel like we really saw each other in a lot of ways for the first time, and our relationship deepened as a result of it. So, and then after you're done having that conversation, invite them to the next All Voices at the Table. Details forthcoming. So follow us on CYN's Facebook page. We'll be posting things there, but we really appreciate everyone joining us today, and hope that you'll come to another one, and hope that you'll invite friends to come with you. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Gary, thank you very much. Rita, little one, thank you.